So the season premiere for Ahsoka just released, episodes 1 and 2 are out, and there's some awesome small details and Easter eggs you may not have noticed. Whether you have watched all the animated shows or the Ahsoka series is your first introduction to the character, these are 5 things that all fans could appreciate. Let's get right into it. Starting out, I think the beginning of episode 1, Master and Apprentice, just screams Phantom Menace. I mean, you have 2 hooded Force users walk in, identical to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, making their first appearance with the Trade Federation, so I really thought this was a great nod to open out to. I really love the characters of Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati so far, and I'm super excited to see more of them throughout the series. One thing I noticed throughout these 2 episodes is that it really felt like prequel Star Wars. I know I mentioned the opening scene with the Phantom Menace, but did you also notice the transitions? If you look at the scene transitions, they actually use clock wipe transitions at times, and it was pretty cool to see. It felt like George Lucas had his own touch on it. It's funny because it's almost like a PowerPoint presentation or something, but it really adds nostalgia to it. Not only this, but there was another scene that also gave a nod to the Phantom Menace. Did you notice this scene where Shin Hati tracks Sabine? Well, it might look familiar. Darth Maul was exactly the same. Maul sends over his probe droid similar to how Shin Hati sends hers, and the 2 scenes feel almost identical. With this kind of writing that Dave Filoni included within the first 2 episodes, it feels like an actual film more than an episode series. I think this is what it would really feel like if Dave Filoni had his own sequel trilogy. Number 4, the Nightsisters. We find out that the magistrate Morgan Elsbeth is actually a Nightsister. Now, for those that don't know, Nightsisters were basically the witches of Star Wars. They come from the planet Dathomir, which is the same place Darth Maul is from, so technically yes, they are relatives to Maul. While Maul was considered a Night Brother, Elsbeth was considered a Night Sister. These Night Sisters specialize in practicing magic. Yes, magic is actually in Star Wars. In the Clone Wars, we see a lot of the Night Sisters and that the leader of them was their mother. Her name was Mother Talzin. She worked alongside Darth Sidious at one point before he betrayed her and took her son Maul from her. So that's how we see Maul become Sidious's apprentice basically. I will be making a further video on that sometime soon, but Talzin was one of the only people Sidious feared, so the fact that we see a return of the Nightsisters in this new show is huge. Number 3, do you remember this ship in Return of the Jedi? It was called the Home One, also known as the MC-80A Heavy Star Cruiser. This was actually Admiral Akbar's flagship, and if you don't know, this is actually the same place where it takes place. Well, it's back and we see it in the first episode. This scene here is actually the Home One, and I thought it was a great detail to include. Now, while we don't see Admiral Akbar in the scene, that chance still may come throughout the show. Number 2, one of the coolest Easter eggs was Ahsoka's ship being called the T61974. Original trilogy fans, you may like this. Does this number sound familiar to you? Well, if you don't know, this is the same year that George Lucas wrote the rough draft of Star Wars, which was in the year 1974. While it's not confirmed, I'd like to think this was a nod to that. Dave Filoni has done similar things in the past, calling Anakin's passcode in the Clone Wars 8108. This passcode was the same date that the Clone Wars movie released, August 10th, 2008. At number 1, the biggest takeaway from this show, we left on a cliffhanger on what was called the Eye of Sion. We don't know everything about it yet, but it seems to be some sort of portal that will allow Thrawn to return to the main galaxy. Now, for those that don't know, this is actually named after an ancient Sith Lord named Darth Sion. He's no ordinary Sith, but actually one of the most terrifying Sith Lords in all of Star Wars. He was known as the Lord of Pain and lived during the time of the Old Republic. Sion found that instead of death, he could rely on his pain, anger, and hatred, and that could allow him to survive death and achieve immortality. He technically died many times, but his anger is what kept him alive through many years. So seeing what we know about Sion, and this being incorporated as a reference to the portal that could bring Thrawn back is super cool in my opinion. I see this big outline of it almost as like a hyperspace ring like we've seen in the Jedi Starfighters in the past, so it'll be really interesting to see how this works. We actually do see Thrawn in the trailer stand in the same main bridge of the starship where Elsbeth also stands, so this is where it gets interesting. Who will travel to who? Will they travel to the distant galaxy to get Thrawn, or will this new hyperspace ring bring Thrawn to them? That's up for debate, and I'm excited to see where this takes us. Regardless, I think this show has great potential, and as I said earlier, it really feels like this would be Dave Filoni's version if he were to have written his own trilogy. From the opening crawl to the lightsaber duels, it really felt like Star Wars. The amount of lightsaber fights and action we got within the first 2 episodes were great, and I really think the story will only continue to evolve. Personally, I have to rate these episodes a 9 out of 10, but I really want to know from you, what were your thoughts? What would you rate this, and what are your hopes for the rest of the season? Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you always.